It's 45 years since Dr. Richard Beeching brought down his so-called axe on Britain's railways. We lost 5,000 miles of track, 2,000 railway stations and 1/3 freight wagons. But were they doomed anyway? Hello.
Hello.
I want to go to Hull via Market Wheaton, and according to my timetable here, there's a 2:55 which gets in at 4:09. Is that right?
I'm afraid it's not. That line closed more than 40 years ago now.
Closed?
Yeah.
40 years ago?
Yeah.
Oh, that's tragic.
Yeah.
Do you know, I think I might have to do it on my bike. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm going to see what's left of the old York-Hull line, meet some of the people who remember it, and ask the question, did Beeching go too far? I won't be able to bike all the way along the old York-Hull line because in the last 4 decades, parts of it have been built on. But there's a campaign to have the line reinstated, and they're convinced it could live again.
Could get up to 2 million journeys each year, which is a fairly conservative estimate, which would make the project pretty much viable.
And even though it was demolished over 40 years ago, there are still people who remember the line, and not all of them think it's coming back.
No hope at all. No, it's a pipe dream.
One of them even has home movie of the line in action, as well as its last days.
We were just close by, so my husband was able to go out and take shots of it being pulled down. It was sad.
Railways were born in the north. Not surprising then that there were many lines here, and Beeching proposed cutting a lot of them. The Grimsby-London line, a link from Sheffield to Manchester, and nearly everything in the Yorkshire Wolds. For example, to go from York to Hull, you now have to go via Selby.
I don't think that it makes me unpopular among thinking people, because all we're doing is to display the facts of the situation and make proposals for correcting things that are clearly wrong.
Beeching was brought in from private industry in 1960 to clear up the legacy of over 100 years of railway development, which, frankly, had created a bit of a mess. Nevertheless, when he published his proposals in 1963, there was outrage at the extent of the cuts. He became a notorious figure. But was he an axeman or a saviour?
I would say the vast majority of people who attack Beeching do so for absolutely the right reasons. You could say that Beeching was maybe 75% bad and 25% good. And he's remembered very much as the axeman who closed our railway down.
Beeching came along and said, I think quite rightly, this is ridiculous. There's a huge swathe of railway activity which is no longer relevant, and it's dragging down the railway as a whole.
Well, one thing's for sure. York is still at the centre of our railway network, as well as being the starting point for my journey. York's now a city of tourism and service industry, but once it was synonymous with railways. At one time, they employed 22,000 people. And that was down to one man. He turns up a lot in this tale of railway cuts and reopening, and his name was George Hudson. Hudson, dubbed the Railway King, was the son of York who ended up owning 1/3 of all the railways in the country. And he made sure that his home city was the hub of the railway network.
It never became one of the main industrial centres of Britain, but it did become a communications centre, and that was largely down to the role of George Hudson in making sure that, as he put it, and I'm not going to attempt his accent, but make all the railways come to York, and that's what he did. And here we are in the early 21st century, benefiting from the foresight of George Hudson.
Of course, my journey is along one of the lines Hudson built, from York to Hull via Market Wheaton and Beverley. Now you have to do it by car along the notorious A1079. On average, there are nearly 200 accidents a year along here, some of them fatal. It's one of the most dangerous roads in Britain. The original railway line headed north out of York and then branched east across what was then pretty open country. This viaduct was built to carry the line over the River Derwent, and it was bought by the local council for £1. That was 20 years ago, and they've preserved it, looked after it, and now it's a wonderful cycle track with, I have to say, very, very nice smooth surface. And I'm told that if I go a bit further in that direction, there's one of the old stations, Stamford Bridge, still with its level crossing gate. Stamford Bridge Station has been turned into a clubhouse and saved from demolition. You can still see the old platforms, but any reinstatement of the line would mean building a new station and a new river crossing. There's a group campaigning for just that. I've come to meet Neil Pickford, who's a member of the Minsters Railway campaign. Neil, Minsters?
We have Minster at each end of the proposed line, Beverley and York.
Oh, I see. So what you'd like to do is to turn this track back into a railway line?
Not exactly this track bed, but a large part of it, yes. The two towns were separated in '65 under the Beeching cuts, and we think there's an extremely good economic as well as environmental argument for bringing them back again.
But wouldn't it be unbelievably expensive?
Most things are unbelievably expensive these days. We have a road that runs along the route at the moment which is horrendously overused. To double that all the way through would cost about £100 million minimum. They're talking about 300 million for the railway, but frankly, once you start factoring in other figures, the gap isn't that big.
Right. And you really think people would use it? I mean, are there enough people commuting, which is what we're talking about, isn't it?
We anticipate that we could get up to 2 million journeys each year, which is a fairly conservative estimate, which would make the project pretty much viable.
Really? Now, are you going to win?
I hope so. We're in for the long term, and I'm looking forward to getting on the train one day in Beverley and getting into York and having a really splendid day.
Well, good luck. Thanks very much indeed. Take care. Watch out I don't ride over your foot. Well, sadly, this looks like the end of the line for the moment, because across there's a housing estate. And I think the next place I can pick up the line is at Fangfoss railway station. Well, actually, Fangfoss Caravan Park. It's difficult to follow the old track around here. Agricultural land has swallowed much of the old line. That's when it hasn't been built over by housing estates. It's not surprising then that opinion is very divided over the viability of reinstating the railway.
Certainly, I think you could argue that some lines which closed really had ceased to serve a useful purpose, and that's always going to happen. There's always going to be change, but at the same time, to close down some of the lines that Beeching did, like York to Beverley, with hindsight, and hindsight's a great thing, was stupid.
It was a long, straggly country line, a very limited service. I don't think you were going to make that a seriously viable proposition.
To reinstate or not to reinstate? That is the question. Would the new commuters of the Wolds stay in their cars or use a new train? Lovely building. Very Victorian. I don't think I would have known it was a railway station, but actually, if you look at these signs, they sort of give the game away rather, don't they? You can still see the platform, but there isn't much else left. Just across the road from Fangfoss Station lives Desmond Redshaw, who used to be a signalman on the line and still lives right here in Station Cottages. Can you show me where the platform was?
Yes.
Thank you.
Here, step this way.
What do you think about the road?
It's hilarious. It's deadly. Getting back on the railways, definitely. Here, the platform. Here, look.
Oh, yes.
It runs along right away through.
And your signal box?
And the signal box was there, look where that hole is.
So you didn't have far to go to work then?
Oh no, just through the gate and into the signal box.
Right. Was it a good life?
Yes, good life, I enjoyed it.
Did you?
Yes. It was interesting, and you knew that you had them people's lives at stake.
If they could give you a job back, would you like it?
I would if they'd let me. I've still got my gear.
Have you?
My uniform and my books and everything.
Right.
About signalling.
Oh, terrific.
So
excellent.
We're happy. We love being here. We've been great.
So what do you think about Dear Dr. Beeching?
Not much. Not much.
York to Hull isn't the only line where Beeching's cuts are criticised ferociously. Sheffield to Manchester used to be served by two lines, the Hope Valley and the Woodhead line via Penistone. Beeching recommended shutting the Hope Valley, but in the end it was the Woodhead line that went.
We're left Penistone now on the road to Dumford. That is the eastern end of Woodhead Tunnel. I think it would be a crying shame because I think this is one of the best intercity services there is.
In fact, it's now been decided. The passenger service which has run on this line since the first ceremonial train of December 1845 is closing.
The important thing is now to say, look, we've made a mistake. We've got to address issues like climate change, we've got problems on the roads, we can't keep spending all this money on road transport. Let's look at the railways, as a viable alternative.
Lorries thunder across this part of the Peak District, a national park, by the way. But the Woodhead Tunnel line had already been electrified, and that means it's big enough for a radical solution. Put the lorries onto rail.
Woodhead is a national asset. We should be doing what has happened in European countries, and particularly in Switzerland. We should be saying, in their case, the alpine environment is too precious for it to be damaged or even destroyed by heavy lorries going over alpine passes. They have to travel as on flatbed trains.
And there's a case for a fast connection across the Pennines from coast to coast.
What we are going to need, probably sooner rather than later, I think, is a good through route from the Mersey to the Humber, which would take a lot of those lorries off the roads, and the Woodhead line is very, very well placed to do that. Also, it will have passenger potential, but I think its main role in the future will be freight. I'm sure it will come back sooner or later.
A problem for the campaign is getting all the agencies involved to talk together and to pool their money.
The money for the road isn't transferable to rail. So although we're saying, well, you can do, open the railway as an alternative, they say, well, there's no money for that. A national park don't have any authority over the tunnel itself because National Grid owns that. And it does need government to look at it and say, never mind who owns it, where the money is, let's look at the best solution that we can find to these problems.
One of the bigger towns along my route is Pocklington. It's where William Wilberforce went to school, and it's the school which has preserved the old station in a rather surprising way. I've come to meet Clive Hodgson and Eric Walkup, who live in the old railway cottages next door and saw the transformation from railway station to sports hall. The headmaster who bought it must have had real foresight, mustn't he?
Oh yes, yeah. He definitely, I think the railway packed in 64, 65, and he got the vision to buy it with the help of the Sports Council, and it was opened in 74.
Eric, you used to work on the railways, is that right?
Yes, I did a stand on the railway in 1940.
No.
As a junior porter.
That was before I was born.
Oh, right.
Gosh, a junior porter.
For 24 shillings a week. But each week you had to go lamping. You walked three miles towards Hull, carrying 6 lamps for the different signals. So they lasted a week, they're long burning. And then you worked
3 miles towards York doing the same duties. But when there was a gale blowing, some of the posts were about 30, 40, 50 feet high. So you're lucky to get up there with the lamp still lit.
I bet you were. You must have been fit.
Well, you had to be fit, yes.
And what happened when the line closed? Were you still working for the railways?
Yes, but I was at York in those days.
I see.
It was a very sad day, was that. It was November 1965, it was snowing. And the last train from York, everybody was, out waving it off and throwing crackers and whistle blowing. And it was really...
Quite something.
Yeah.
Do you think he was wrong, Beeching?
Oh, definitely.
Do either of you think the line might run again?
No chance.
Why not?
There's no chance at all of his reopening.
You never know what's going to happen with oil. So maybe we might go back to railways.
It'd be good, wouldn't it?
Well, we'd be nostalgic.
So you think there's no hope?
No hope at all. No, it's a pipe dream.
I mean, there's still a lot of people who use railways.
Yeah.
Whether a place of this size would actually carry it. It would be nice, but as I said, it's going to cost a hell of a lot of money.
Well, there's the station, but if you look this side, you'll see there's nothing left of the railway line at all. In fact, in many of the villages, the only way you can tell there was ever a railway line is from the street signs. So I'm off to Market Wheaton.
Oh, Dr. Beeching, what have you done? There once were lots of trains to catch, but soon there will be none. I'll have to buy a bike, 'cause I can't afford a car. Oh, Dr. Beeching, what a naughty man you are.
The 9 hours to Manchester will leave from platform 13.
Beeching's plan to modernise the railway wasn't just about closing rural branch lines and concentrating on inner-city services. He was just as determined to make freight pay. For freight, he had a twofold plan. First, he recommended freight trains should carry bulk loads in containers.
When he developed the idea of the Freightliner train carrying boxes on trains, which also can be carried in ships and on lorries, which had been developing before he arrived with very good managers who'd spotted the opportunity, I thought, wow, this is the way the freight business should go, and I was proud to play a small part in implementing it.
But Beeching's most radical proposal was for a revolution in the way coal was transported. He didn't foresee the closure of Britain's mining industry, but he scrapped the old shunting wagons and introduced a whole new system for carrying coal. It was called the merry-go-round because the wagons never stopped moving, from coal mine to power station to coal mine. Today, we import most of our coal from abroad, but the merry-go-round trains still do the job.
I think really he revolutionised it all, or his ideas revolutionised it all. His recommendations were followed through by British Rail. Both the Coal Board and the CEGB, the nationalised industries of those days, heavily invested in the infrastructure to facilitate this new merry-go-round operation. I don't know if he foresaw the massive change and decline of the coal industry, but the changes that he put in place actually meant that the rail industry was, I suppose, better organised to cope with those changes. In the last 3 or 4 years, the rising coal prices meant that the UK mines can actually compete with imports now, and we are seeing an increase, albeit small, in the production of the UK mines and the possibility of 1 or 2 mines reopening. I look forward to seeing that day.
Of course, it's now controversial whether we should be making electricity from coal at all. Ironically, coal imports have meant that the beautiful Settle-Carlisle line, proposed for closure by Beeching, is now at full capacity, with imported coal coming from Scottish ports. But it was people power that saved it in the first place.
Fortunately, the Settle-Carlisle line was saved. And if the Settle-Carlisle line had closed, it would have been the thin end of the wedge, and a lot more lines would have closed during the 1980s and 1990s. And it was only as a result of that huge campaign with 30,000 signatures, mass letter writing to MPs, demonstrations, lobbying, that saved that line. And I think it does go to show that people power, if it's coordinated and focused and as good, strong arguments, can win.
Like Settle-Carlisle, the Huddersfield-Sheffield line was under threat of closure ever since Beeching's report was published. Its saviour came in the form of a jazz band and a bar.
People come along and it's exactly those people who've not used a train for donkey's years, who are wedded to the car, think, well, let's have a night out on the music train, see what it's all about. And they think, well, this is pretty good, and maybe think about using the train for journeys to work or journeys to shops or Meadowhall or into Leeds.
But the York-Beverley line needs more than protection. It's all but disappeared round here. Market Wheaton was once the major rail crossroads for the Yorkshire Wolds. Not only did the York-Beverley route go through here, but also the Selby-Brid line. But I can't seem to find any sign that there was anything here at all. I've come to meet Enid Greenwood, who lived locally and knows exactly where the old line ran. Is it always as horrible as this in Market Wheaton?
Oh, no, it isn't.
Pleased to meet you.
And to meet you, yes.
Now, tell me, this really used to be a railway line here?
The railway line would come through here.
Right, through that back garden?
Approximately.
Both Enid's father and husband were keen amateur filmmakers. Their home movies are an extraordinary witness to what was once a thriving railway market town.
It was a junction.
A junction?
Yes. Many people came and had to change here to get to one place or another.
Right. And what about the station? Where was that?
The station would be approximately here.
Just in that garden?
Virtually.
It's all gone?
All gone, yes.
Right. And when was the last train?
The last train was the one from York. It was snowy and very cold. So we came down from Gubbenham, brought the children down to see the last train. It was sad. And there was a wreath in the station.
Commemorating the
yes, the
death
end of the last day
yes.
of the railway.
From here to Beverley, the old line's easy to follow because it's been turned into a cycleway, and it's called Hudson's Way, after the railway king himself. Actually, he didn't see the line finished because he fell from grace. He was caught fiddling the books, apparently just adding some zeros to some of the figures. And in 1865, the time the line actually reached Beverley, he was thrown into a debtor's jail in York. It was a time of railway mania, and Hudson was at its core.
He was up to no good as far as money was concerned. He kept people on board by all sorts of financial trickery, and he's gone down in history as something of a rogue. There was this huge speculative bubble, a bit like the dot-com mania we witnessed here a few years ago. People poured tens of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds into railway schemes, some of which, frankly, never stood cat and hell's chance of being built. And the inevitable happened. Lots of small investors lost their money. But, I mean, a lot of those railways were built. The reality is that by the early 1850s, we did have the skeleton, or more than the skeleton, of a national railway system built almost exclusively with private money.
This is Kipling Coates, probably the best preserved station on the line. The platform's still here, the station sign is still here, and even the old signal box. But the funny thing is, it's in the middle of nowhere. And that's because it's a tale of aristocratic influence. The land was owned by Lord Houghton MP, and he absolutely refused to sell it for the railway until they promised him that he could have a station for his workers and that there would be no trains on Sundays. Isn't that wonderful? Riding these cycle tracks, even in the rain, isn't unpleasant. It makes you wonder why Beeching took an axe to such idyllic routes. Was it just because they weren't making money? Or had the tide turned against rail in general? In the 50s, the car became the star, and politicians created a national motorway network.
Government thinking changes. And from then on, it's the railway which becomes the supplementary form of transport. And we can understand Beeching and the Beeching era closures better, I think, if we are clear about that context, that change in government thinking in the middle of the 1950s.
Ah! This is it! This is the end of Hudson's Way. Just look, there's nothing but bramble bushes. And the funny thing is, I can see the real railway line just there. It's 100 yards away. That's the line that runs from Bryd down to Beverley and on to Hull. And this ought to join it. But it doesn't. That's as far as I can go along the line of the old track. From here, it's a ride to Beverley Station and back on the train. The future for the York-Beverley line is unclear, but it's become clear to me that there are real prospects for the railways. Whenever you talk about trains, there's plenty of nostalgia and a fair bit of sentimentality, but the oil is running out. Carbon emissions are an increasing concern. Rail may not be the answer, but it has to be part of the answer.
There is an increasing enthusiasm for the train as a green form of transport, and sometimes, although I perhaps hesitate to say this, as a convivial form of transport, that it is somewhere where you're not just sitting in your box, but there is the opportunity to look out of the window and have a cup of tea and relax. It can be like that, and I hope it will be more and more in the future.
Whether you think the lines are going to reopen or not, and whether you think Beeching was a rationaliser or a vandal, the fact is that the railways are part of our future. The technology may be 200 years old, but it's not over yet.
All we're doing is correcting things that are clearly wrong.
It is understood that a good public transport system is part of a civilised society.
We are going to be forced to doing some fairly major rail reopenings in the next 20 years. I'm absolutely sure of that.
If you're absolutely chuffed with our season of Steam this year, why not have your say on the BBC4 website, where you can also sign up for our newsletter. Next tonight, we're examining the findings of Lord Beeching as Ian Hislop goes off the rails.